How would you feel about school taking up an extra hour every day to teach basic adult stuff like washing clothes, basic cooking, paying taxes? This is kind of the basis for Home EC, the main subject I teach, as it is these days in Australia. It's moved towards solution-based problem solving. Students learn about how ingredients interact with one another under different conditions, they learn about nutrition, they learn about technology in food, ranging from how UHT works to GMOs to drones in agriculture, about ethics in the food industry, food security, marketing, sustainability, etc. It's a huge subject. In their last couple of years they can choose to do a subject that is focused on cooking and the hospitality industry, but they can also choose more academic subjects around food and or health, so up until then we cover all the stuff they need to know and be capable of doing to go either way. Kids fresh into high school start super basic and make a couple of very easy things with the real purpose of teaching them to be safe, work both independently and with others, write and follow a plan based on a recipe, and clean up properly. It's also when we start teaching them why they need to use brown vs white sugar and keep eggs out of the fridge for baking, etc. At my school it's mandatory in their first year, and after that they can choose. Edit, since everyone is asking about the eggs. If you have room temperature butter and then add cold eggs, the fat in your butter is going to be unhappy and get cold. If you've ever creamed butter and sugar together only for it to go lumpy once you add eggs, it's probably because the eggs were too cold. The effect this has on a cake is that it ends up denser than it should be. If it happens, trying folding some flour through the mixture but not too much. If the recipe says the butter is room temperature, your eggs probably should be too. I always wanted to take a class like that, but they never had anything like that at my school. Then, after I got my costuming degree, I looked into teaching home EC kind of sewing stuff, and there's next to nothing here, too. And when I looked at volunteering to teach these sort of classes, how to fit clothing you've bought, how to lengthen or shorten hems and sleeves, what makes a good piece of clothing worth investing in versus something cheap not worth the effort, how to clean clothes, you get the idea. I got basically told those aren't skills kids need. Which is dumb as hell. No matter how much money you have, if you don't buy good clothes and if you don't spend money fitting them or know how to do it yourself, you'll look like a schlub. Plus, who knows? Quilting might become someone's hobby or passion just for having tried it. My middle school food classes had us start with how to follow/interpret basic recipes, like difference between a tablespoon and teaspoon, and nutrition. So by the time we hit high school the foods teacher got us to have Iron Chef competitions where we would have access to a pantry/groceries and have to make an entree featuring a particular ingredient. Also that teacher would hunt/fish on weekends, so showed us how to butcher our own cuts from a larger piece of whole beef and how to boil fresh caught crabs, on a stove outside because the smell was really awful, like low tide on steroids. I've never done the butchering or crab boil since then, but I definitely got confident enough to improvise a meal out of whatever I happened to have on hand. My high school had a great way of dealing with this. Tuesdays we had 1 ST3RD, 5th, and 7th period classes for twice the normal length of time. Wednesdays were 2 ND4TH, and 6th periods also extended. 3 Wednesdays of the week, we had Access, which took up the last class of the day. It was basically a free period for the entire school. You could go to teachers in their main classroom if you needed their help with classwork/homework, you could study/get caught up on any classwork or homework that you were behind on, or do anything else that you wanted to. The only thing you couldn't do was leave campus because it was still considered school time. The remaining week was just a short day where you got to go home immediately after 6th period. It really helped just about everyone get better grades. Most people did better in school because they got to study with teachers one-on-one or in small groups of 5 or so students at their own pace. Others took some much-needed relaxing time away from both homework and home. Edit, We also had 7-hour school days, from 8:30 to 3:30. This strikes at a core difference in work. Medical staff have an entirely different environment than, for instance, a programmer like myself. When I've sat for a long period of time focusing, there's noon who needs me. When my brain gets tired, there's no significant external stimuli to keep it going, and even if there were, the code doesn't magically appear on the screen just because I will it. Meanwhile, medical staff do have these external stimuli. There is that thing to be done, there is that patient who needs you, etc. It's actually one of the things I miss in this job. I always have work to do, but the work is always so abstract and can always be postponed, explained away, etc. You always have to actively find meaning in your work as a programmer. You always have to connect these entirely abstract things to the real world. My girlfriend owns a cafe, and it's so refreshing coming there and doing the occasional job. Nothing is abstract, everything just is. People think I'm this great boyfriend who helps her out fixing shit and stuff, but truth is, a lot of that is just me escaping into reality. Doing a job where things make sense without having to expend energy forcing it to make sense. Note, I love my work. Schools have these already and the kids in them don't care. It's not immediately relevant to their lives, so they don't pay attention. Sorta like if I were to talk to you about the do's and don'ts of denture cream. You say, I'll figure it out later when I need to know it, and stop paying attention. I've taught in several schools that have tried to teach social skills, kindness, meditation, financial literacy, etc. In every case, the kids did not care. It was their least favorite part of the day because it felt like a waste of time. The point of education is to teach thinking, not doing. A well-educated student can teach themselves these things. A quick Google search can teach you how to file taxes, cook, etc. But you can't Google how to do Algebra 2 and expect to understand what you read without some background in the subject matter. Edit, I got upvotes? Now I'm mad with power, so I'll say this. I hear arguments like this post all the time, and I think the real issue is people not taking responsibility. I can't cook. That must be the school's fault. We need education reform. No, it's not the school's fault. It's your fault. You could literally Google a recipe in 20 seconds. Stop blaming other people for your problems. People don't realize that the point of education isn't to teach facts, but to change your brain. For example, physics and math majors earn the highest scores in the MCAT, GMAT, and LSAT. It's not because they learn those things in class, but because their curriculum emphasizes logical thinking. When students slack in schoolwork, they're not just missing out on the opportunity to know stuff, they're missing out on the opportunity to be smarter. This is all stuff anyone would be able to get info online or ask somebody at home. Hey, Mom, how do you write a check? Boil an egg? Change a tire? Get your prescriptions filled. It boggles the mind that kids would be willing to sit their ass in a chair at school for hours to passively listen to this, while adulting simply means that you take the time to look it up yourself and learn on your own. Since you are adulting, you get to decide how much time you want to spend on any of these things. Learning to cook does not mean you have to become a chef, it just means you can feed yourself reasonably nutritious food that you enjoy eating. You can go all out and learn to bake a fancy quiche if you enjoy it, or just learn to fry a couple of eggs in 2 minutes. You decide, and have the power over how you want to feed yourself. It's okay if you don't want to learn to do your taxes, although if you only have one job and don't have properties or business, it can be so straightforward that it's probably worth learning to do on your own in a couple of hours. There's no need to buy a sewing machine to alter your clothes unless you think you would enjoy it as a permanent hobby, but anyone can spend a couple of dollars on a cheap sewing kit and look up how to sew a button, because it only takes a few minutes and it does come in handy. Totally fine to wait until your button falls off. There are no prescribed items you must know to be an adult, you just have to do the best you can with what you have, and that often means learning something new on your own when needed, and you get to decide how to do it. These are things that can be learned independently by simply doing them. Taxes are damned near idiot-proof in most cases because they are designed to be. Washing clothes, follow the instruction manual. Cooking. Watch YouTube, follow a recipe. What these all have in common is that you need a solid grasp on numeracy and literacy. These are things that must be explicitly taught. These are the core skills that underpin almost everything. People who complain about not being taught how to do their taxes tend to have shitty numeracy skills. People who struggle to fill out a form tend to have shitty literacy. Can't read instructions. Literacy issue. You can make education as practical as possible, but the fact is, many don't want to learn, until it's too late. I say this as a teacher, we really do a lot to make education as relevant to real-world needs as possible, but there is not getting around the fact that a person must learn to be fluent in both reading and writing, as well as be able to think mathematically to cope in the real world. The rest of what we do is for the purpose of teaching you how to learn effectively, how to think in different ways, how to adapt to unfamiliar challenges, and how to deal with abstract ideas. We don't teach the model of the atom because you need to know where the electrons go. We teach you so that you can learn how to grasp concepts that are not directly observable, make logical conclusions from them, and apply abstract ideas to real-world phenomena. The actual topics are just vehicles for these skills. Well, my kids learn that at home. I did not learn anything at home but taught myself. I didn't have much education either due to neglect. I needed to learn, and for the most part if you can read instructions then you can do it. Today there is YouTube and such as well. I'm not sure why people can't do laundry or cook if they can read. I'm thinking also, my kids all took home economics, sewing, etc., so isn't it already there? So my first thought is it would be a really boring class for some that don't need it, but an easy credit and helpful for those that do. An extra hour of their time every day adds up though, and not worth it if not needed. I'm also thinking since we moved to a different state the education here is shockingly terrible. We've been blown away at the lack of education and efforts to push kids through the system at all costs. My son came home laughing on his first day because tests here aren't actually tests. The teacher shares the answers when someone raises their hand. It's crazy. My daughter had an assignment on her third day here regarding a subject she had no knowledge of because she entered midterm and should have failed or had to redo it after studying because she only got a 56 on it. The teacher gave her a B and with some story about knowing half of it anyway. That's not right. She doesn't learn the subject if she's being pushed through. Something needs to be done, but I don't have any answers. I'm so concerned about kids growing up in this type of school system. They can barely read. Maybe that's half the problem right there. Repost by somebody else. I see this we should have learned real life skills in school thing quite a bit, and I want to take a moment to address it. The following is not an attack on you, but rather on the sentiment you expressed. I think you did learn accounting and budgeting for a house in first grade when you learned how to add and subtract. Surely by 6th grade you'd mastered 4-digit addition and subtraction, which, for most of us, is quite enough to construct a budget. If you wanted to extrapolate your monthly income to yearly goals, surely the multiplication you learned by 7th grade would do the trick. If you wanted to get super fancy and figure out how much interest your savings account will accrue, that same multiplication applied with a little understanding of fractions would fit the bill. What school can't teach you, though, is the willpower to actually sit down and write out a budget and stick to it. School tries to instill this lesson indirectly, what with points and grades and earning and such, but it's not a lesson that easily transfers for some. Let's move on to the next one, how to build credit. I suppose school could have taught you the formula for calculating your FICO score, but you'd have to use quite a bit of that math you learned in Algebra 2 to really do it well. By the way, carrying large balances relative to the maximum amount you can borrow, Applying for a lot of credit in a short time, and not paying your bills on time all hurts your credit. Applying for limited credit, spaced out, using that credit, and then paying it off on time builds your credit. Now what are we going to do with the remaining 45 minutes of the period? Again, schools try to help you practice these skills. Kind of kid who turns in work late all the time. Bad grade, credit score. Kind of kid whose dog always eats the homework. No one is going to believe you when the dog really eats your homework. Kind of student who makes a good faith effort to learn and participate. You might find that 79 turning into an 80. Doing good earns you credit. Doing bad burns your credit. Taxes. I love this one. Schools could have better prepared you to do your own taxes if they had placed more emphasis on making the instructions for every assignment more difficult to read and written in the most obtuse way possible. They could have compounded the lesson by ensuring that completing any assignment required for you to locate and properly fill out 4 separate forms, 2 of which you would require you dig through piles of your old work in order to complete. I'm sure no one would have complained about that. How to apply for a loan. Step 1, call the lending institution of your choice. Step 2, declare that you would like to borrow some money. Step 3, answer a bunch of questions, including what your SS number is and your total yearly income. Step 4, get approved or declined. No one reads your resume. It's a page and most employers know it's bullshit. Cover letter isn't much better. But even if they had a great deal of weight. Cover letters, and resumes for that matter, are best as documents tailored to their specific workplace. Tailoring your writing to a specific audience/task one of the chief skills English class is trying to teach you. Here's the bottom line, you are right. Everything important in your life you do have to learn on your own. School cannot be the place to give you all the knowledge you'll ever need. Especially in a world moving as quickly as ours is. The best school can do is to help you train your brain to deal with complex, abstract concepts and apply those skills to specific tasks. School can teach you how to learn. The algebra and the literary analysis is the substance of how that is done. It's not really important to be able to list off the major character flaws of Macbeth, far more important to be able to take an obtuse document, Shakespeare equals tax code, and make sense of it. Far more important for you to be able to think about this guy who got everything he wanted, and still wasn't happy, and what that means for your life. I'm sure it's been mentioned, but we used to have classes for this. I don't mean just at my school. Until the 70s everyone took civics, health, and home economics. This covered pretty much everything a high schooler needed to exist as an adult. Though sometimes just girls took home EC while the boys took shop or mechanics, as men were still expected to work while the wife stayed home. Then in the 80s this all went away, usually due to budget cuts. But at one time, this was all a normal part of high school. There were classes. Typically civics and health were mandatory. Often health was tied to gym class. Health covered hygiene, sex ed, basic first aid, etc. Home EC was simple cooking skills, how to balance a checkbook, everyone used them then, but essentially just basic finances, maybe some sewing, ironing, etc. How to run a home more or less. Civics covered how to behave and think like a decent human, why and how you vote, etc. Though what they taught at the time, all of this, understand that life and society was much different. Everyone was supposed to create the perfect nuclear family, and the educational system was stuck in the 50s more or less until STEM and standardized testing became the norm. The education system in America today is disgusting and completely needs to be rethought and overhauled. Sorry for the edits, I kept remembering more. I wouldn't want to see kids in my country, the United States, have an extra hour of school, because I think they already have problems with too much classroom and not enough breaks. I was sort of just naturally built for long periods of concentration, but most people I know are not, and they had a really hard time in school. The stuff I've read by productivity experts encourages more breaks than we ever got in school. It seems to me like the items you've mentioned, and a lot of other living skills adults should have could either be covered in a required class that takes the place of an elective, or rolled in with the regular curriculum in required classes that use similar skills. I learned the basics of all of those in middle school, and a lot of other stuff, too, but it was a long time ago, and I don't know if they still teach those. I also had the benefit of a stay-at-home parent who made sure to really work with me on all of that stuff, but that's not realistic anymore. As I think about it, that just makes the idea of covering it in schools more important, rather than less so.